Hello. I'd like to send my greetings to all my colleagues throughout the world. I hope you are safe and I hope you are well. My name is Scott Kellogg. I'm a clinical psychologist and a psychotherapist in New York City. And as some of you know, I've been working with the Chairwork, what I call the psychotherapy art form of Chairwork, for a long time. Faced with this pandemic and these difficult situations, I thought, how can Chairwork and how can the 4 dialogues, or can they even be used to help us with fear, with courage, and all the difficult emotions that we're all experiencing? So I developed this webinar to share some of my thoughts about working with fear, developing courage. And I would say this is probably a more general discussion of the issue, but hopefully some of this work will be useful and helpful for us with patients who are dealing with COVID-19, either having it or the fears of getting it. When I give these talks, I often start with the 4 orienting principles and the 4 dialogues. So the 4 orienting principles are essentially the foundation of Chairwork, sort of basic principles that kind of anchor and guide the work. The first one of these is multiplicity of self, that it is clinically useful to understand people as containing different parts, different modes, voices, or selves, and that it's healing and transformative for people to give voice to these different parts. It's also healing and transformative for people to enact or reenact scenes from the past, the present, or the future, and that the ultimate goal of Chairwork is the strengthening of the ego, the healthy adult mode, or the inner leader. This idea of the ultimate goal of Chairwork being strengthening the healthy adult mode or the inner leader is kind of the true north of Chairwork. Because whenever we get lost or confused or whatever, we can go back to that principle. You know, where is the I? Where is the inner leader? Because all roads essentially are leading to that outcome. A little history and background. Some of you know Dr. Jacob Moreno is the creator of psychodrama, and it's actually Dr. Moreno who created the Chairwork technique. It was really Frederick or Fritz Perls, the creator of Gestalt therapy, who really developed Chairwork into what we know of it today. So Perls, Moreno, had these sort of open psychodrama sessions from the early 1940s to the early 1970s. And many people came and attended. Perls attended regularly from the early 1950s to the early 1960s. So Perls learns Chairwork from Moreno. But in my opinion, he takes Chairwork beyond what I think Moreno had envisioned. I think for Moreno, it was a relatively unimportant technique, and really turns Chairwork into what I would call a psychotherapeutic art. One thing he did was he moved Chairwork from being used in a group setting to being used in an individual setting. So that's, of course, a revolution in the use of Chairwork. My own study, I've worked with many different kinds of Chairwork, and I've struggled to find kind of essential model, essential structures of Chairwork. And in 2018, I discovered the 4 dialogues. And to my mind, these are the 4 core dialogue stanzas, the 4 core Chairwork stanzas. And then really all of Chairwork can be understood as using one or more of these various stanzas or these various dialogue structures in the work. So the good news is that in fact, there are only 4 things you need to learn. You don't really need to learn anything else. The first of these is giving voice. You might say to a patient, I would like you to move to this chair, and I would like you to speak from your heart and speak from your pain. Patients say things like, there's a deep grief within me, or I'm feeling very agitated right now. It's the kind of situation that you might want to consider this. It also connects us to Gestalt awareness practices and to voice dialogue. Next is the paradoxical theory of change. This was a paper that was written by Arnold Besser in 1970, really kind of captured the work that Fritz Perls and his colleagues had done in the 1960s in California, and really basically said the way to change is to more intensely be whatever you are, or whatever you're doing, just do it more intensely. So the way to change is to more deeply be yourself. Giving voice is the heart of the work. Nothing else is needed. And in this classic Gestalt paradigm, this is the only method of change. In fact, they don't believe anything else really works, so they emphasize this profoundly. Carl Rogers in some ways echoes this when he says the curious paradox is when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. We can also use giving voice for these kind of what I call existential intentionalities, moments when people choose a direction. They say yes, they say no, they shift their lives in these kind of profound and dramatic ways. Mary Donqua, in her memoir on depression, said, that was the day, the first time ever in my life that I made a commitment to being alive. Not the first time I said I wanted to live or dreamed about living, but it was the first time I made a commitment that I gave myself my word. Here's this moment when she takes suicide is now off the table. Second one is storytelling. At the heart of any therapeutic encounter, there is always a story, wrote Roberts and Holmes. You might say to a patient, I sense that holding this secret inside for so long has been a terrible burden. If you're willing, I'd like you to move to this chair and tell me the story of what happened. Patients say things like, there are stories within me that have never been shared. I told a few people about the accident when it occurred, but I do not feel I ever really talked it through. Here's a chance to come sit and tell the story, and the power of telling a story, of releasing that burden. Internal dialogues. Probably a lot of the work you're doing already is in this realm of internal dialogues. You seem to be of two minds about the project. I wonder if you'd be willing to go to this chair and speak from the part that wants to go forward with it, and then to this chair and speak from the part that is having second thoughts. So again, patients say things like, I'm of two minds about the situation. There's some sort of inner conflict, maybe a decision to be made. We can put the different perspectives in different chairs. Or I have a deep fear of elevators. I'm afraid that I'll be trapped in one of them and die. Kind of problematic or distorted thought, and then maybe a rational response in the other chair, back and forth. Or I have this voice in my head that keeps telling me how bad I am. Inner critic and healthy adult mode in the other chair. This sort of back and forth between these different parts. And essentially in internal dialogues, there are three ways to do this. One is that the parts coexist. You invite the person to speak from different parts. They just speak independently. The second one, more commonly used, is the parts actually engage with each other. Dialogue, trying to engage in some way. And the third one, which really draws from the third wave movement in psychotherapy, is that one part witnesses the other parts, stands outside, observes them, and gets some distance from other. And the fourth is relationships and encounters. Say to a patient, I sense that you are still very stuck, even though the relationship ended 2 years ago. I would like to work with this if I may. I'd like you to imagine her sitting in this chair. I would like you to talk to her and tell her what you're feeling. Situations when a patient said, I know that it's been 3 years. I'm still grieving the death of my mother, the grief and loss. My father was very cruel to all of us when I was growing up. I'm still very angry about that. Sort of mistreatment. Or my sister is just impossible. I feel responsible for her, but she's driving me crazy. Some sort of difficult relationship. And here we can express emotions, express our love, our anger, our fear, our sorrow, or our grief. Leslie Greenberg's written about facilitating versus modifying approaches to therapy, and I would say approaches to chair work. Modifying approach is where the therapist actively seeks to make changes in the patient's inner world. Right? We're sort of on a mission. We want to do cognitive restructuring, sort of active ways of changing. Facilitating, here the goal is to help the patient grow in awareness, help them experience parts and emotions. So it's really the expression and the experiencing of parts, but there is no other ultimate agenda. I would say as a full chairwork practitioner, you really want to have the skills of both. That you want to be able to do modifying work and you want to be able to do facilitating work. Some patients do better with one or the other, some problems do better with one or the other. But for this work at this time, I think the facilitating approach is better. That we open up these chairs, we have people speak from these parts, but we trust the process essentially. We let the chairs do the work. We don't push things. I think that's a better approach in the middle of this pandemic. So some interventions. Voice dialogues. Voice dialogue was created by Hal and Cedra Stone, and it's a very deep and a very profound practice. I suggest that you study it and even learn it if you're interested in chair work. We're going to give you a very light version of voice dialogue. Sort of two parts of the process includes creating a self-witnessing mode that's in center, and then giving voice to different parts that exist within the self. So the person starts in center, you pick some sort of issue, whatever the problem is, we then move to another chair where they give voice to their emotions, their thoughts, experiences of that part. So certainly part of it is expressing the emotion. Having a chance to do that. The therapist, or what they call a facilitator, can then interview the part to better understand it. Story, its history, its role, its purpose. And then the person can then move back to center and reflect on the experience. The return to center also reflects that this is a part of the person, not the totality of who they are. Right? I think it's very important. I emphasize that a lot. People say they're very, very frightened. A part of me is frightened. There's also a center. You see that echoing perhaps ACT in some ways. One thing I like to do with patients is invite them to go to the suffering chair. Move to this chair Now give voice to your pain. You speak freely and deeply. Fear, frustration, anger, resentment, envy, grief, whatever it is. Again, they get a chance to release this emotion. This is very interesting to do. It can be very diagnostic. You get a sense of what is the nature of their suffering. It really can be quite, a powerful experience for them and also for the therapist. I often do that early on with the patients. And that's giving voice. Cognitions and chair work. And here I'm influenced by the work of Dr. Robert Leahy. So cognitive restructuring can be understood as encompassing a series of methods centered on challenging or disrupting problematic schemas or beliefs. Essentially, the old belief can go in one chair, and the newer challenging belief can go in the other. And I think a number of cognitive therapists, David Burns among others, have said repeated dialogues and encounters using different perspectives can weaken the problematic belief. Just do one dialogue, you can do it in different ways. So kind of a classic model is a distressing thought. We identify the distortion, we co-create or create a rational response. And so we can put these into chairs. Distressing thought, rational response, go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I would do that many times, by the way. Probabilistic thinking, another issue. Cognitive therapy and anxiety, how likely is this to happen? Here are some statistics from China, but basically many, many people, number of percents are very low. So using that, we can create two chairs. It's very likely that I will get sick and die. The other chair, it's not very likely that I will get sick and die. Two chairs back and forth. And this is an internal dialogue. Very likely to happen, not very likely to happen. Not impossible, not very likely to happen. Another idea is three outcomes: worst case scenario, best case scenario, and most likely scenario. So worst case scenario, I get sick and I'm killed by the virus. Best case scenario, I use the time wisely and I have a creative breakthrough that changes my life. Most likely scenario, it's a stressful experience filled with loneliness, boredom, and anxiety, as well as some experiences that were interesting or moving. And here we can give voice to all three outcomes in separate chairs. People move around in chairs. If you don't have chairs, have them stand up and move around the room. Worst case, best case, most likely. And this kind of encounter of keep giving voices to different parts will probably weaken the worst case scenario energy. And these are examples of internal dialogue. Imagery rescripting. So in schema therapy, I'm also a schema therapist. There's a belief that we have emotional reactions to things that are happening in our current life. That, of course, is very important. But our emotions may also be connected to earlier experiences in our life, underlying schemas or traumas in some way. So that the pandemic, even though it's as frightening and disturbing as it is, may also be triggering emotions related to earlier traumas. And imagery scripting provides an emotional bridge, which helps the patient, helps us move to connect the current distress to the underlying maladaptive schemas. So here we want to go back into a traumatic or difficult memory and change the ending. Right? It's to change the ending that brings some healing. So we do this with imagery, but we can bring in whatever resources are necessary to feel strong and protected, police, weapons, other spiritual forces, whatever is necessary to feel safe and secure. Also have the patients use their voice, and they can confront the transgressors. I like this example from Dr. Guido Jacobs in Germany. He said, a clinician felt uncomfortable confronting and setting limits with narcissistic patients. Our therapist asked her to sit in the frightened Catherine chair and bring up an image or memory from childhood. Catherine brings up a memory from age 14. She reported a bully for his bad behavior. He threatened to beat her up. And for months, she lived in deep fear that she would be attacked. Catherine gets an image in which her persecutor appears in the school and approaches her in a threatening manner. In the rescripting, the movie character of Terminator shows up to help Catherine. He stops and arrests her persecutor and sends him to an adventure-based educational project far away in Canada. I love that phrase, so compassionate. And this image brings strong emotional relief for Catherine. Strikingly, she's now more empowered with these narcissistic patients. So we see how going to the past actually empowers her in the present. And this may be something that's happening for patients who are experiencing anxiety right now. This is an example of storytelling and relationship encounters. So some fear reduction practices. Relaxation response, we know from the science, this is very, very important practices, a range of them. often involves some sort of version of a mantra meditation. Transcendental meditation, another sort of evidence-supported, evidence-based practice, also using a mantra, but using a slightly different system or understanding. And EFT tapping. I know tapping is controversial. I personally find it to be very, very helpful. I think you need to make your own decision about that, but that's another way to deal with emotion, to be with difficult feelings. I would say these are, in their own way, examples of giving voice. Another way to do this is developing a new relationship with the fear itself. Mindfulness meditation being one commonly practiced. What I'd like to sort of share with you today is what I call self-witnessing, and this really is drawn from the work of Teal Swan and her completion process. Teal Swan has created a 17-step healing process that's kind of like schematherapy in one sitting, I would say. But two of the steps, one's called emotional vipassana, the other is validating feelings. I'm kind of drawing from those two, from this very interesting work that she's created. So quoting her, she says, by being unconditionally present with an inner wound, you are finally making it okay to feel exactly how you feel. We sit with it completely. We embrace it. We are unconditionally present with it, and we let it know that we are willing to experience it without needing it to change. So in many ways, she's obviously sort of a mindfulness aspect to this, but I think there's a warmth to this and a relationship quality that I find to be very attractive and very beautiful. I actually practice this a great deal myself. So at least I can speak from some personal authority that I find this to be amazingly helpful. So it's a method of dealing with painful or difficult emotions in the present. It's important you make sure the patients understand this, or you yourself. They're not for past emotions. I was feeling bad the other day. Let me go back to that experience. It's for emotions in the present. So you want to create two spaces in your mind, essentially. One for the witnessing mode and one for the suffering mode. So in my mind, my witnessing mode is on the left side of my brain or my head, and my suffering mode is on the right side of my brain. The core emphasis here is on presence. You move to the witnessing mode, you close your eyes, and you say things like, I am here. I am present. I am with you. All your feelings are welcome. All your sensations are welcome. You are not alone. I am here. I am with you. I am listening, and I am on your side. You say, now, in your mind, now switch to the suffering mode, and give voice to your feelings. And these feelings or sensations are emotional feelings or physical feelings, sensations, but not your thoughts and not your story. The witnessing mode says things like, I'm hurting, I'm suffering, I'm in pain, or I feel sad, I feel frightened, I feel fearful, I feel upset, I feel distressed, ashamed, alone, shattered, guilty, bad, anxious. You want to stay there for a minute, just go check in with yourself. You know, I'm feeling sad, or I'm aware of some sorrow inside of me. I'm aware of some anger, right? Monitoring what's going on inside. Then we switch back to the witnessing mode. So that's about a minute or a minute and a half. And back to witnessing mode. Reaffirm that the suffering mode is not alone and that it has been heard. I'm here. I'm present. I'm with you. I heard what you said. All your feelings are welcome. All your sensations are welcome. Your anger is welcome. Your sorrow is welcome. Your guilt is welcome. I will not leave you. I am on your side. I am your ally. And then switch back to the suffering mode again. You want to repeat the cycle, witnessing to suffering 4 times. And the last time you end on the witnessing mode, you end the work. And I have found that this is often immediately very helpful of shifting the way we're feeling. Sometimes I find there's sort of a 10-minute delay. And then sometimes, you know, it doesn't work at all. But, you know, it's a practice that I use regularly and I find to be very helpful. Moving to slightly more act version, as you get more comfortable with it, you can language of I am feeling, then I'm aware that I'm feeling, or I'm aware that a part of me is feeling. Right? A sense of more distance in practice. So very interesting way of working. I would do it a few times yourself first before you try and teach it. And these are, of course, internal dialogues, different parts of the self. Moving to courage. Winston Churchill said, courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees all others. Herodotus wrote, "It is better by noble boldness to run the risk of being subject to half of the evils we anticipate than to remain in cowardly listlessness for fear of what might happen." Noble boldness, what a beautiful phrase. I'm particularly influenced by what I call heroic existentialism. Dr. William James, President Theodore Roosevelt, Dr. Albert Schweitzer, I think three men in this case who have really sort of in their lives and in their writing have sort of embodied these ideas. Dr. William James wrote, "We draw new life from the heroic example." President Theodore Roosevelt said something to the effect of, "We seek the strenuous life." And both he and Dr. Albert Schweitzer developed a kind of a moral code for themselves, an ethical code. And they both said, I make my life my argument. I live by my principles, and I live to some degree in public by my principles to demonstrate a life of courage, a life of creativity, especially a life of courage. So the way of courage. So I think there are two things we can do. One is developing a courage mode, and the second is living for something greater than ourselves. In terms of the first, I found this book by Tom Rutledge, Embracing Fear, to be very good. This is a great book, by the way. The courage mode. When we decide that we want to go forward, we want to take an action. Dr. Rutledge says, invite your fear to speak. Do not hide from it. Call it out. Look directly at the fear. Listen to what it is saying, what it is threatening you with, and then take a deep breath and say, I am willing to risk it. So here we can have two chairs. Fear chair says, if you do this, you will be sorry. Then you move to courage. I am willing to risk it. Back to the fear chair. You are sure to make a fool of yourself. Courage chair. Maybe I am willing to risk it. Fear, you can't do it. You have failed before, and you will certainly fail again. Courage. I have failed in the past, and I am willing to risk it. So here we have this two modes. Courage mode, I'm willing to risk it. Right? In many ways, this is kind of almost like a characterological change that we are making here. We're not arguing with the fear. We're not debating the fear. We're not cognitive restructuring. We're not looking for distortions. We're saying, I am willing to risk it. And I like to think of developing a courageous self or a mode as a part of the self, consciously developing this part through repeated acts of courage in the face of small anxieties or fears. And I think the courage mode, when we go there, involves a kind of a shift in consciousness. Different values are activated, of one of which is that being courageous is the goal that matters most, right? Not so much the outcome of the situation. Second way for courage is living for a greater purpose. George MacDonald wrote, nothing makes one feel so strong as a call for help. As I've looked at people who change their lives, I've seen basically 4 patterns. And one thing I've done for a long time is work with people wrestling with addiction and are changing their lives and recovery and transforming their lives. And many of these people have really destroyed things and are kind of a square one or ground zero kind of state. And I've seen various combinations of 4 projects, I would say. Pick one, merging several of these. I'm not saying these are the only projects, but these are the ones that have come to my mind and also from things I've read with other people who talked about this. But the first one is this, it's some sort of injustice to be remedied and corrected. There's something wrong taking place in the world and I want to fix it. Second one is there is a suffering to be healed and relieved. People are in pain, I want to heal them, relieve them. Third, there's something of beauty to be protected and preserved, right? Something that I value is endangered. I want to protect it, preserve it, keep it safe. Environmental example of that. Or there's someone or something that is loved to be nurtured and developed. Whether it's a child, whether it's a business, right? You want to help them grow. And we use various combinations, of these 4 things or just picking on one. So you get people to go to 4 spaces or 4 chairs and sort of give voice to these 4 energies. See what do they feel like, right? Because when we are connected to things, when we have emotional connections, we have meaning, when things matter, that gives us courage. People observe this over and over again. It's relationships that help us have courage. But courage is difficult, right? We have to deal with fear, it's stressful. And perhaps there are some sources of strength and renewal that we can turn to. And the first one I would say is prayer. A recent study on prayer, looking actually at patterns of prayer among people who are sick, said that praying can be regarded as a strategy to cope and a way to connect with a higher source, providing meaning and hope. Affirmations would be the second one. This would connect us to the law of attraction, which is very popular these days. This is from Louise Hay, who's the great teacher on affirmations. When I talk about doing affirmations, I mean to consciously choose sentences or words that will either help to eliminate something from your life or help to create something new in your life. And you do this in a positive way. And the third one is what I call archetype, intention, and synchronicity. This would be the hero's journey, kind of a Jungian approach to things where we essentially trust the journey, right? This is what we do when there are really no guarantees. We're trying to do something where the odds are completely against us. These kinds of situations say, okay, I'm engaging this, I'm entering the archetypal realm. And I believe this is sort of most succinctly captured by these words from William Murray. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth. At the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves to all sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. And this idea of things happening that we cannot explain, the synchronicity principle, is extremely powerful. William Murray is an interesting man. He actually was a major, the leading mountain climbers in Scotland. He was involved in the preliminary expeditions before they climbed Mount Everest for the first time. He was actually a prisoner of war. He was in the British Army. He was held by the Germans for 3 years during World War II. This is not a man who thought this up sitting at a desk. This is a man who's been through very terrifying and frightening experiences. He said this is a truth that he experienced. So that's pretty amazing. And just to finish, I tell one story. So many of you probably know Bear Grylls, his TV shows. Bear Grylls was a member of the SAS, which was an elite UK military force, and he worked very hard to be accepted in it. He worked very hard, was turned down a couple of times, but fought to get into it. He was parachuting with some friends in South Africa and had a very serious accident that almost paralyzed him. While he was in the hospital, he realized that his military days were clearly over and that his life would now be radically different. And since he was such a physical man, he was really worried, what am I going to do? Barely able to move, he really plunged into a deep state of depression. But in the midst of despair, he came up with this idea that he would climb Mount Everest. Now, this was an idea that he'd had before. But in the bed and in this hospital, this came to him like, this is what I'm going to do. And this vision became the center of his recovery. And by the way, nobody believed he was going to do this. But he said, my decision to climb Everest was a bit of a do or die mission. He embraced the idea that he would be at 23 the youngest British soldier to have ever climbed, perhaps the youngest British citizen to have ever climbed Mount Everest. He got out of the hospital, was working on his rehab. He spent months looking for sponsors, but no one was interested. But then he writes, I was bicycling down the pavement in the city of London when I passed a company called DLE, which stands for Davis, Langdon, and Everest. Can you believe this? The company's name is Everest. I thought, as I skidded to a halt. He goes inside, looking kind of scraggly, up to the office, begs the secretaries, please just give me 2 minutes with the CEO, just 2 minutes. Kept pursuing them. Finally, they set it up. He says, the two head guys, Paul Morrell and Alistair Collins, both had the grace to listen. By some miracle, they caught the dream and my enthusiasm. They gave him 10,000 pounds, and he was on his way. And and he got more money because he now had the first sponsor and climbed Mount Everest. He became one of the youngest people to ever do it. So that was sort of an astonishing story. And that's the kind of intuition, intention, synchronicity, archetypal story I'm talking about. So core dialogue strategy, just to summarize what we're talking about. Giving expression to the fears, transforming fear and anxiety into a part of mode, dialogues with other modes, challenging the accuracy of the fears, cognitive therapy, engaging with the healing of traumatic origins, schema therapy, using self-witnessing as a way of creating a new relationship with fear, third wave, developing the courage mode as a method for counterbalancing fear and increasing freedom, so existentialism, making a purposeful and emotional commitment to others as a way of developing and manifesting. So with that, I'd like to thank the masters, Dr. Moreno, Dr. Pearls, and Zirka Moreno, giving us this extraordinary gift of Chairwork. I also express my gratitude to Dr. Robert Leahy for his work with the cognitive therapy work, Amanda Garcia Torres, my colleague, Paola Mascatelli for designing some of these slides, and my wife Nadine Kellogg for her support. And I thank you for your attention.